Hello, nerds. This is Jesse from Rock Sugar, and you're listening to the Geekcast Radio Network. Keep it right here.
GeekCastRadio.com presents Geekcast Radio Special Episode on Heavy Metal. And now, your hosts, Mike TFG1 Blanchard, Music's Mr. Neil, and Chuck Dog 1999.
Hello and welcome to Geekcast Radio. I am one of your hosts, TFG1 Mike, and we are continuing the epic music spotlight. The countdowns are over. The artist spotlights are done. We are now moving into several specialty topics. This week, it's all about the heavy metal, and joining me is Music's Mr. Neil. Hello, sir.
When you listen to fools, the mob rules.
And from the podcast that is celebrating their 1-year anniversary, or did so a few weeks ago, Chuck Dog 1999 from What's on Joe Mind. Hello.
Mike, what's going on?
Oh, nothing. Just freaking hip-hop, stupid neighbors. Ugh, I hate living in the ghetto.
In the ghetto.
Why couldn't there be a metal ghetto? That would be awesome.
In the ghetto. Well, there is a metal ghetto, but it's called Birmingham, England.
Oh, okay then. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, Chuck has been on the Music Spotlight before. Neil, you've been on several of our other shows, but for those that are listening to just the Geekcast radio feed, why don't you introduce yourself? Because you're mainly known as TV's Mr. Neil.
Yes, I'm TV's Mr. Neil from the Animation Aficionados podcast. I've been on several other Geekcast shows, mostly about cartoons and
Yes.
a couple movies, I think. And I've also been on This Week in Geek talking about toys and crap like that. But I am a big metal fan, and Mike put out the call for anyone who likes heavy metal. I'm like, dude, my avatar has metal hair.
Well, I was mainly just trying to find a third person in general at the time when I posted that, because I know some stuff about metal, but I'm not highly versed, and I don't listen to it all the time. And I needed someone that could actually deal with Chuck's nuances, let's say. I swear to God, if you sing, your podcast is just coming off the network.
Oh, wow, what a loss. That would hurt you more than it would hurt me.
Right. No. But no. So, all right. Okay. Neil, what have you got? You got anything you want to promote, or anything that's coming up for Animation Aficionados, or anything like that you want to get out there?
Well, in a couple of weeks, we got a He-Man episode coming up. It's half He-Man, half talking about the history of Filmation. The guest we have on that is a listener. I don't remember his name off the top of my head. We also have an episode coming up about Gem and My Little Pony, and we have returning to the show Kitty Hawk and another special guest, who I will not reveal at this time.
Cool. What about you, Chuck? What's been going on with What's on Joe Mind?
Well, the 1-year anniversary special, our 52nd episode, just went up earlier today. And if anybody listens to it, and you kind of hear a difference in my voice, basically the Michael Bell interview, which is there, which, by the way, Mike, you really should listen to, because it's
I'll get to
absolutely hysterical.
Dude, between the time this episode of GCR goes up and the time we recorded it, I will have recorded over 20 5 to 45 podcasts, so I'm getting to stuff as it goes.
Okay. Well, no, but I just want to point out because it's
Right.
really funny, and just so any fans out there are wondering, yes, we do have a blood on blood moment, but the thing is that was recorded on Wednesday. Tuesday night, I mean, I've already said this to Gary and a few other people. I have no recollection of Tuesday night because I was the one screening because we had a call-in show and I was the one screening the calls. So basically, if you just hear me going, yeah, okay, sure. I remember answering one question and it was just basically me grabbing whatever came to my mind first. So. And it's our longest podcast ever. It's like clocks in at over 3 hours. That's why it took so long to edit, but it really was a labor of love. And believe us, if you think that was good, what we've got planning now for our second year is going to be just as big, if not bigger.
Yes. All right. So getting into heavy metal, we have 4 different topics. The first of the topic is how did heavy metal emerge? Now, when I first noticed it was sadly in my teen years. So I knew of 80s metal because my mom listened to it, but it wasn't I wasn't listening to Poison all the time. I wasn't listening to a lot of the oh God, I wasn't listening to Led Zeppelin and all that stuff a lot in the 80s as a kid, but in the 90s when I found Metallica, that's about as heavy metal as I get is Metallica. So this show essentially is a Neil and Chuck show. Because they are the experts here. So who wants to take how did metal really emerge?
I can go first, Mike, if you don't mind.
That's
all
fine.
Right. Well, I think we need to go back to actually what I consider to be the catch-all of all modern popular music, and that's the blues. The blues came from the slave spirituals of the Civil War in that era and contemporary American folk music. Basically what happened is you had folk music being played with a shuffle beat, and then as it developed, you had different melody structures, and a form came out of it. Well, the blues really took off in England, as a lot of music took off back then due to, unfortunately, the racism of America. Well, you had a lot of young, white, British teenagers drifting towards the blues. So first, you had a lot of these blues-based rock acts. Well, the generation coming up behind them said, I like this. I like that 12-bar structure, but I want it a little harder. Before you started recording, Mike, we were talking about Birmingham, England. Well, Birmingham, England's very important because a large number of British heavy metal artists came from there. And their story is predominantly the same. There was an economically depressed area, had one steel mill. They were surrounded by these loud sounds of hammering and thundering and steel being slapped together with more steel. They just wanted something louder. So
okay, I have to stop you for a second because sadly I'm flashing to season 2 of Iron Man and the Black Sabbath imitation of him hammering on.
Well, I mean, Mike, back then, that's really what a steel mill was for these people.
Right, yeah.
And really what the blues is, I mean, what heavy metal is the blues turned up to 12. Right. By this point, you had Jim Marshall had developed, who unfortunately just passed away about a month ago. He came out with his Marshall stack amplifier, so now you had volume never before heard. There was innovations being made in terms of early guitar effects, overdrive, distortion, and you had these kids now taking what the generation before did with the blues and adapting it to these new sounds and getting these harder sounds. On top of that, if you go a little further east into Europe, you had these kids taking that sound, but then applying classical music structure and ideas to it, namely the diminished fourth, which is a perfect fifth is when you go from one note to another, and it's considered a perfect interval. There's no sharps, no flats. A diminished interval, or in this case a diminished fourth, is when you take that perfect interval and you make it flat. You know, for many years that was considered outlawed and criminal because it was the tone that could summon the demon. Well, a lot of early heavy metal was built around that concept. So once you had the blues on 10 merging with these classical music styles, you had this new type of music that was being played in clubs that was louder and in most cases faster than what came before.
Right.
And it went from there. And that was like the early form of metal. And then over time it became polished into different other types of metal, which I'm sure we'll get to, but that really was the start of it.
Neil, thoughts?
Yeah, he hit it right on the head. I had a more rudimentary set of notes here. Basically, yeah, it's like it's an amalgam of rhythm and blues and other forms of music, mostly classical, I think. But yeah, wow, he really had a lot of notes there.
Wow, you left him speechless, Chuck. Well, what Neil ends up being speechless unless his co-host is interrupting him.
Well, one of the things that I had posted on your Facebook wall was if you ever wanted a smoking gun as to metal arising out of much softer and more radio friendly music of the 50s, all you have to do is find Ronnie Dio and the Prophets. And it's Ronnie James Dio in a doo-wop band.
Oh yes,
this video will be embedded into the post.
Oh,
it is so weird to see Ronnie James Dio with a pompadour.
Oh, Neil, I've actually since his passing, his family and the Ninja record company have actually started releasing more of that early stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny because it's a doo-wop structure, but as soon as you hear him, that's Ronnie James Dio. You know, you can't deny it, but
he sounds great. He took that style of singing and moved it into metal, and I love metal singers that are like Ronnie James Dio, where they have a harmony to their singing and they're not just screaming. The caricature of heavy metal, especially from the 80s, is just some guy screeching at the top of his lungs, but a lot of the singers are actually very, very good, and Ronnie Dio is probably one of the best.
Well, Neil, I mean, we got Ronnie James Dio. You have Rob Halford. What's his name from Iron Maiden? Bruce Dickinson. Yes. I mean, a lot of these guys are classically trained, you know, I don't want to like operatic style singers who have that type of control.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, that's actually you actually touched upon something like the voice, the singing. I mean, I'm a guitar player, but for me, when it comes to music, especially heavy metal, it's the voice and the drums that get me first, and the guitar usually follows behind.
Well, I don't know if this is blasphemy, but this is just from me being into what I'm into. I would say for this generation that we're currently in, and even the late 20th century, Disturbed and David Draymond, he's an amalgamation of both the screamer and the singer. Because some of the soft notes that he can hit with his voice is amazing, and when he screams, it is also amazing. Same thing with James Hetfield. He's a great screamer, and he's a great singer as well. And they both have, in their singing voices, they have that melodic tone that you don't really remember it's a metal song until, like, take, just as an example, take Down with the Sickness. When Draymond goes to that softer place, the thing that brings you out and reminds you that it's a metal song is the next drum course. So yeah, I mean that's just amazing that kind of stuff can happen. Um, so besides all the stereotypes that we've given them, what really makes a metal band a metal band? I mean, besides big hair and screaming voices and everything else, or is that just it?
Uh, for me, growing up in the '80s, it was showmanship. I look at metal bands today, and they don't seem to have the showmanship of the old days. But maybe I'm just being cranky. Like back in the '80s, everything was like fringe and tight pants, and I mean, for Christ's sake, Paul Gilbert had fringe on his guitar, and yeah, when they started cutting their hair off, I was like, what are you guys doing? Stop doing that. But
Neil's just an old fogey.
yeah, I'm an old fogey.
Oh man.
Well, I think the hair stereotype, unfortunately, has really become a detriment to a lot of bands. But in terms of what makes a metal band metal, starting off just from a technical song-based structure is number one. A lot of the songs don't fit the traditional 12-bar blues pattern, the 2-minute, 30-second song limit. A lot of times they go 4 or 5 minutes. They have tempo changes, key changes, rhythm changes. Sometimes they can even go as like the epic 7-minute song. Also, as Neil touched upon, there's a lot of virtuosity. If you do a poll and say the 10 best singers, the 10 best drummers, the 10 best guitarists, depending on who this poll is open to, a lot of those spots would be heavy metal artists. Guys like Eddie Van Halen in terms of guitar playing. Paul Gilbert, as Neil just mentioned, Warren DeMartini, Richie Sambora, Yngwie Malmsteen. Mm-hmm. And then on the drums, drums is a little easier. For me, it's basically Cozy Powell, Ian Pace, but he was more of a '70s guy. But also in terms of the actual devices, I had mentioned it before. The Marshall amplifier, you really needed those large stacked amplifiers. High Watt also was a popular brand that could just produce the volume. It's cliche now, but back in the days, you would have that wall of Marshall stacks behind the great guitar god, and as he works his magic.
Right.
I think one thing that differentiates the first wave of heavy metal with the newer wave of heavy metal that came about in the '80s is the type of guitars. You basically went from Fender Stratocasters and Gibson Les Pauls to a lot more independently made guitars like Kramer's, Charvel, Jackson, that were of a smaller, lighter body. Now, the joke in the industry is basically you had a bunch of these 99-pound weaklings coming along who couldn't hold a Les Paul because it was too heavy, but that was like a big change.
I remember, and I sadly I think this is simply because of Wayne's World, but I remember that the Fenders, the Stratocasters, were the ultimate guitar for not only metal but rock and roll as well. What's like, because I don't know when it comes to music, and I've said this before in the music spotlight, if I like something, I like it. So I don't Chuck knows all this technical crap. I don't mean that negatively, but what's as far as a sound or the way that a song sounds between a Les Paul and a Fender, what's the difference?
Well, a Fender Stratocaster, an American standard Fender Stratocaster, let's going to keep this simple because there's a lot of different kinds of Stratocasters,
right,
contain 3 of what are known as pickups. Pickups, in the simplest way to explain it, are magnets that have wire wrapped around them that are wired together, that when you plug them into an amplification device will boost the sound coming from the instrument. The type of pickups that a Fender Stratocaster have are called single coil, which means they're 3 magnets wrapped around a few, once, like that. And it tends to have a thinner sound, depending on, how you have your, because the Stratocaster it has a switch. You can have like different configurations to get, very twangy, very plucky type of sounds, very thin sounds. I wish you would have mentioned this, because I would have brought my Strat and I could have done a demonstration for you, but I know you don't like those things. A Les Paul, which I tend to prefer, but is a Les Paul, have what's known as a humbucker. Now, Les Paul was invented by Les Paul, the guitar player, right. And he basically did it, he amplified his guitar just to hear himself over the horns in all the jazz bands he played in. That type of pickup is actually double the size of a single coil, and it really amplifies the sound of the guitar. It's actually a much louder, punchier sound. And then when you have both guitars overdriven through a good amplifier, the Les Paul really just, gives you a punch. I mean, I remember the first time I bought my Les Paul and I played like the first chord. I had to sit there for a minute because I was just overcome with the power of it. And of course, I'm saying this, there's a million different other kinds of pickups you can replace. There's different pickups from different years sound better than this one. But I'm just, trying to keep it as simple as possible for the listeners.
Right, yeah. All right, so I think we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to let Olaf lead it. So we'll be back after this.
Olaf metal. That's his fucking metal face. Olaf girl nice.
Scarlet.
That's fucked up, man. Come on, Berserker. Girls think sexy. I'll watch. Wait, he's gonna sing and watch. It's too funny.
My love for you is like a truck berserker. Would you like some making fuck berserker?
That's fucking funny, man.
Did he say making fuck?
I'm
We are back here at Geekcast Radio's Music Spotlight talking about heavy metal. The next topic is kind of like what Chuck was just talking about, the art of being metal. And you kind of already hit on it with the guitars and everything else. But how do we want to approach this topic? Because again, when I made these topics up, I was just like, what could we talk about? I don't know. So, how do we want to approach this?
Well, Mike, I think maybe if we give a general synopsis of the different types of metal,
Mm-hmm.
And go into each one, like, how, the individual art of that type of metal,
Right.
that might be a little easier.
Right. Yeah, that'll work. All right. So start us off. Where do we go?
All right. Well, we got to start with the first wave of heavy metal. That really started in Europe in the late 1960s. You had some of the sounds, in America as well. There was a band called The Animals. A lot of metal musicians considered them highly influential just because they were doing, 12-bar blues, but much harder. And Eric Burdon, who was the singer, he was a British guy. The Animals were a British band, but, he was doing the old that was very. So out of Germany, you had the Scorpions with Rudolf Schenker. Then in England, you had Judas Priest. A little bit of Led Zeppelin, but Led Zeppelin was a straight-ahead hard rock band. From there, you had some other bands coming up in mid-'70s, Deep Purple, Rainbow, Starcastle in America, which, sometimes gets pushed more towards the progressive rock end of things. These were the guys who really were just taking the 12-bar blues, turning it up to 12, and going from there. You also had some of the first guitar, Richie Blackmore in Deep Purple and Rainbow. Rainbow was Ronnie James Dio's first introduction to the world. And that was when you had the Marshall stacks. It's funny. Blackmore was playing a Fender Stratocaster, and he was killing on it. The Scorpions and I think Judas Priest, they were playing early Gibsons or early Fenders, but they were playing Fenders with humbuckers in it. But it was like just that, like I was saying, that Birmingham steel sound. Well, that was more. That's really more the Scorpions and Judas Priest. Rainbow and Deep Purple, you had much more classical music oriented structures, and that's from Blackmore. He would play. There's major and minor scales in music. There's also the blues scale. Well, there's also stuff called the Mixolydian, Aeolian, which are just, to explain to the listener, just different ways of playing the notes. And he used to focus on that.
Right.
And, he was doing what we call shredding before shredding was even a term. It's like you listen to him sometimes, and it's like I just couldn't. Even now, just trying to describe it, it's like I've seen sheet music for Highway Star, and it features this very intricate solo part, and he was playing 30-second notes. Now, to give you guys an idea, when I studied music in school, 30-second notes were the fastest notes you can play. And every teacher I had explained that usually when you get to 30-second notes, the tempo of the song is slowed down to make it easier to play, or you're just slurring. Now, slurring is you're not clicking, you're not hitting the note with your finger. You're, using your fretting hands to play the note. He was picking them, which means both his left hand and his right hand had to be moving at an extremely fast rate. Now, of course, that was on the album. Live, when he would do the solo, he would just slap his hand on the guitar, play a couple notes, and then rub it up against the amplifier. But that was Blackmore. Now, in terms of the look, in terms of like when you said the art,
Right.
this was really when they were taking. It's funny. Neil mentioned the Ronnie James Dio being a doo-wop singer. This is where the matching outfits sometimes would come into play. The stage presence, the moving around. Because before this, you had guys like the Beatles and stuff like that who would just sit there, bob their heads, play their guitar, and sing. But now you had guys like Ronnie James Dio who would wave their hands, get the audience to sing, point, have syncopation with his gestures in terms of the lights. He didn't move around much. That was the one thing about back then with Ronnie James Dio. He was basically playing himself and singing. But Ian Gillan, who was the lead singer of Deep Purple, he would work the stage, twirl the microphone, stuff like that. David Coverdale, who actually you might know from Whitesnake, got his start in Deep Purple. He replaced Ian Gillan. He would stand there, like he's dry humping the microphone. So this is when you had a little bit bricks. Guys were spending money on stages, fireworks, lighting ray. And I think if you want to, this early period of metal, I think in terms of theatrical aspects, you have to mention Kiss. Because Kiss went with it. They were on with makeup and these giant costumes. The heck they were able to play, I'll never know. And they really made metal like a theater experience.
Mm-hmm.
Also, Alice Cooper.
Oh, well, Cooper is the granddaddy of them.
Yeah, he was.
The band and Vince Fournier Alice Cooper. It literally is a lot of these shock bands today. And I just look at him and says, look, Alice Cooper did that 40 years ago and he did it better. Just, worry about writing a song. Don't worry about cutting off your head on stage. So, to talk about Alice Cooper, the chicken incident.
Yeah.
You guys know that story?
I think so, yeah.
It's funny. I'm not going to tell the story over because there's 100 different places you can find it. But the one part to it that I like that I actually never heard before, Frank Zappa, who was a brilliant, genius-level musician who I think passed away in the 90s. Mm-hmm. Impact today. He spoke Alice Cooper, and he said to him, chicken into the audience? Yeah, I thought it could fly. Did you mean for? Well, don't tell anybody. You're all over the cover of the papers. This is the best press ever. And the funny thing is, what was funny about that is this was a concert that was a benefit for handicapped people. So the first couple of rows were people in wheelchairs, on crutches, missing limbs, what have you.
Oh, jeez.
They're the ones who killed the chicken. They ripped it to shreds.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. I don't think we can talk about metal and not talk about Ozzy and his bat.
Well, Ozzy and Sabbath really came along that are of British heavy metal, which was,
which is so funny because I never up until the Osbournes reality show, it never occurred to me that Ozzy was British because he sings like he's a friggin' American. What is it with British people that talk the way they do, but yet they can sing like they live in America?
Well, I think it comes from the whole blues style, because most of the blues musicians they listened to growing up were American. So they're just copying that vocal style, if you know what I mean.
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm. Neil, anything you want to bring up?
I had something and I lost it.
Wow.
I was trying to. You were breaking up a lot there. I was trying to follow what you were saying, but yeah, the chicken incident was where he threw a chicken into the audience and it came back in pieces.
Talk about some extra crispy strips.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I misspoke. I said Black Sabbath was part of the new wave of British heavy metal. The Aussie Black Sabbath was actually part of that of British heavy metal. I mean, they were really the first one parting albums.
I agree with Chuck when he says, the fact that metal was, the beginnings of metal was the showmanship, and really it's kind of what I mentioned way back in the beginnings of the music spotlight here at GCR was, in the 60s and the 70s was you went to a concert to see someone live. It wasn't like the 60s you went to see them live. The 70s you started going to see for a show. Because it seemed to me, specifically with, the one I can really bring up is the Beatles, but, I mean, before they ended their career, they recorded and released 12 albums, or they recorded all this material, beforehand, versus nowadays where you have a band, say, best metal examples I can use is Metallica and Disturbed. Probably Disturbed before Metallica, because they release an album every 10 years or so. Oh, wait, no, that's Tool. But with Disturbed and with any really like metal / rock band nowadays, they'll release an album in 2012, they'll tour until 2014 or 2015 promoting that album and promoting those new songs. Whereas back in the 60s, they would release album after album after album and maybe have one tour during those 5 albums released. So yeah, starting in the 70s, it was more of a show that you were going to see. I guess we can kind of switch over to metal bands that we like. For me, I don't listen to a lot of metal. Not a lot of the heavy stuff. I think, as I've already said, Disturbed and Metallica is about as heavy as I get. I can listen to certain Black Sabbath songs and certain Ozzy songs, but it's not a genre I listen to all the time. I don't dislike it. It's just not in my wheelhouse. I'm more of a mainstream type of guy, mainstream rock. So, Neil, what about you for metal bands that you still listen to or like?
Well, top of my list are Deep Purple and Rainbow. Both Ritchie Blackmore bands. Like them for pretty much the same reason. I love Ritchie Blackmore. I love Ian Gillan and Ronnie James Dio. And Rainbow actually went on after Dio left. They had they had Graham Bonnet as singer. They had a whole bunch of guys, and
Joe Lynn Turner.
Joe Lynn Turner. That's who I was trying to think of. I couldn't think of it. They had one final album with some guy, and
Dougie White. It's called Stranger in Us All.
Yeah, that is one of the strangest albums that I own, because it almost seems like it's Ritchie Blackmore refusing to change, and after that album was released to critical yawns, I guess he quit heavy metal altogether and formed
Blackmore's Night.
Blackmore's Night, yeah, with his wife, who is about the same age as me. Yeah, here's this 60, 70-year-old guy on stage, and his wife, who is just a knockout. But other metal bands that I like, let's see. Well, Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, Impellitteri, Racer X, Motorhead. And Motorhead's kind of funny because Lemmy has this voice that's kind of really grovelly. He's not really what you would think of as like, a screaming, melodious singer that all these other guys are. But I didn't like it at first, and it kind of grew on me after a while, and now I just can't get enough of Motorhead. Let's see, Motley Crue, Skid Row, Yngwie. Yeah, those are basically all the ones that I like.
What about you, Chuck?
Oh wow. Well, for me, I first really got into heavy metal through the Scorpions in the 1980s. They had an album called Love at First Sting, and it was just watching the videos. I was like, wow, this is really cool. From there, I got into a lot of the pop metal, Poison, Bon Jovi, Warrant, Winger, Motley Crue. But really now, I tend to listen to the more straight ahead new wave of British heavy metal, Iron Maiden, TNT, Rainbow, Deep Purple, the 80s era of Black Sabbath, which featured Ronnie James Dio, Ian Gillan,
Tony the Cat Martin.
Tony Martin. Oh God, Tony Martin's like my favorite Black Sabbath vocalist.
He is so underrated.
Oh God, it's such a shame that they can't get back together. And like they did Heaven and Hell with Ronnie James Dio, they can't do like Headless Cross with Tony Martin. But Cinderella. There's a great band called Steeler, who featured a guy by the name of I think his name was Richard Keel. He eventually went on to have his own solo success, but it was Yngwie Malmsteen's first band in America. There's a group called Badlands, which was Jakey Lee's group after he left the Ozzy Osbourne band, and featured Ray Gillen on vocals. Unfortunately, Ray passed away in the early 90s. Very underrated group. Of course, Ronnie James Dio, the voice, except Ronnie James Dio. I have a rule about heavy metal bands. You either have to have a woman as a singer or a guy, but the guy can be no taller than 5 feet.
Oh. So the Undertaker is not going to be the lead singer of a heavy metal band anytime soon.
No, he can't do it. Because, Udo von Lichtenstein, these guys are like 5 feet tall. They got a voice that fills a room. Ronnie James Dio said it. It's not the size of your pencil, but how big you write your name.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, I'm just gonna...
And I think the one that we've kind of not even mentioned really was,
Megadeth?
Huh?
Megadeth?
Okay, there is that. I was going for more of, the Back in Black crew.
Oh, yes, AC/DC.
AC/DC. Yes. Well, the problem is I don't consider AC/DC heavy metal. I consider them a hard rock.
Yeah, that's kind of weird whenever people call them heavy metal.
See, that's what confuses me half the time with metal. And that's why I wanted to have you guys on this episode, obviously, since I apparently know nothing about it. But it's like, bands like Metallica, I mean, Disturbed essentially is a rock band, but they are so heavy that they could be considered heavy metal, or I guess they could be considered new metal. It's like, I don't know, for me, it's so hard to distinguish between the two genres sometimes. So
the easiest way I can distinguish between hard rock and heavy metal is hard rock is predominantly that rhythm and blues on steroids. And then heavy metal is that has that more classical tinge with the longer songs. Like you can have a hard rock song that's 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Heavy metal, a little more difficult.
Yeah. All right. Was there anything else you guys wanted to bring up? Anything else we want to talk about consisting of heavy metal?
Well,
go ahead.
Well, I wanted to mention, Neil mentioned Rainbow. And I mentioned Rainbow. It was really around the time that Joe Lynn Turner came into the band. That's when the new wave of British heavy metal came along. That guys felt that a lot of the older bands were starting to become a little too poppy. So that's when you had Iron Maiden come along, Merciful Fate, Saxton. Oh, Saxton. Denim and Leather brought us all together. You had Black Sabbath Reborn with Ronnie James Dio, and a lot of those other bands. But it's funny. If I say the band Whitesnake, what's the first thing you guys think of?
Is this love?
Yes.
or here I go again.
See, this is what kills me is that a lot. And I think I mentioned this on the 70s or 80s show.
You did.
Whitesnake was a 6-piece blues rock band for 10 years before the 1987 album. It was right around 82, 84 is when they started to make the switch. But I mean, then they went from hard rock, and then around 84, some guys left. You had a guitarist by the name of John Sykes come in, and that's when they went more towards the metal edge with Cozy Powell on drums, Neil Murray on bass with John Sykes, and then it went off from there. But, David Coverdale, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, got his start in 73 with Deep Purple. I mean, he was doing that, harder rock. Unfortunately, by 85, Whitesnake became David Coverdale's band, David Coverdale and band. It wasn't like the cohesive unit. But yeah, I think, there's so much we didn't touch upon. I know we have a fixed window.
Well, I mean, like I said, when I was putting this episode together, I mainly put this episode is here in the Music Spotlight simply because you asked me to do it, and I was like,
yeah.
Okay, I guess. And I that's why I essentially said this is going to be a Neil and Chuck show, because I'm on unfamiliar territory here. So, I mean, if there's anything else you want to bring up, feel free. Go ahead.
Well, you know what is, because we mentioned it earlier, and the stigmata of being a hair metal band.
Right.
Now, I guess, Neil, I can throw this to you. How many bands do you think had their careers tainted because they got stuck with that label? Because I hate that label. I prefer the term melodic rock or pop metal. I mean, I just hate the label hair metal, because that's what the mainstream media uses to describe the music, and it's just so wrong. I mean, for bad I can think of Whitesnake and Rat are two bands that got stuck with the hair metal logo and it completely really screwed up their careers. I don't know how you feel about it, Neil.
I never really thought about that, but yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, because I mean that's all you ever hear. Like whenever I watch, because I only get regular VH1, I don't get VH1 Classic or any of the special VH1 channels. But whenever I see the top 100 hard rock songs, the top 100 heavy metal songs, it's like, oh well, these guys were hair metal of the '80s, and I'm like, okay, weird.
Well, I mean, another band I can think of was a band called Tesla. Tesla was a phenomenal band that, frankly, should never have been given the moniker hair metal, because they really weren't a metal band. I always considered them a little bit more hard rock, but they could have had huge success. But because they got stuck with that hair metal thing, it was like once 1991 came around, boom, they were done. Def Leppard was able to hang on to 92, but because of the fact it takes them 2 or 3 years to record an album, they got killed.
Yeah.
I mean, people tend to forget the early Def Leppard albums. I mean, there were some heavy riffs on it, but then Mutt Lange came in and really structured them into that 2-minute 30-second format. But they were still a killer band. I'm just thinking now. I mean, obviously, guys like Poison. I mean, they were a pop metal band. I mean,
yeah.
It was on MTV. I got all these great influences. I don't know why they can't come out of me. I just play the same 3 chords over and over. It's like another great band, Cinderella. I mean, if you look at one of their album covers, you wouldn't be sure if you're looking at women or men. But as soon as you start listening to it, it is great hard music. But because of the hair, they were hair metal. which is a shame because they had such great music.
Yeah. Yeah. What else did you want to... Neil, did you have anything else from your notes that you wanted to bring up?
Just to kind of go back to what it was like to buy albums back in the day. Because if there's one bane of existence to every heavy metal fan of the 80s and 90s, it's the Japanese bonus track. And I spent so much money going after like rare versions of albums to have like one or two extra songs. And nowadays you can get all those for like nothing.
Yeah, that just... I mean, I guess that would be more so for like when we do the music spotlight wrap up, talking about that kind of. Well, no, I'm not. I'm not saying we're not going to talk about it here, but I'm just like, it's not just with the metal bands though. That's with any music release. Honestly, it is because I don't understand. Like, okay, I hate to bring this up, but I have to because it's the only example I can think of. There, when a certain Nickel album came out last year, Mr. Kroger said that for him and his band, whatever the record company pays us for, that's how many songs are on an album for them. He's like, we're not going to give the record company a free song. If they pay for 12 songs, that's what you get. If you pay for 11 songs, that's what you're going to get. But you got other bands that will do 3, 4, 5. I've known a couple bands that do 5 or 6 bonus tracks, and they'll. I mean, I know this is the digital age now, sadly, and there's really no such thing as actually going to a music store and buying music anymore. But they'll release an iTunes version, a Walmart version of this version of that version, and as you said, Neil, Japanese only tracks and stuff like that. And it's like, well, why can't we? Why does it have to be a country exclusive? I mean, there are so many stores, Walmart, Target, whatever, iTunes, whatever. I know certain bands have different versions of the same album, but it's different content at different prices. But essentially, it's the same album. Like, you can buy the regular version of an album that's just the 12 tracks, or you can buy the special edition that's like 16 tracks plus the iTunes LP visual thing or whatever else. But the whole country thing just never made any. The whole international release of only these fans get this extra stuff, where whereas if you really want to hunt it down and find it, you can do so, but you're gonna have to go vacation in the Netherlands somewhere.
Preach on, brother, preach on.
I mean, I just don't understand that. If you're a fan of that band or that artist, and you want to hear everything that they have produced for the latest album that they're doing, why not make that available to everyone instead of having people have to hunt it down?
Yeah.
Shut up, Chuck.
No, Mike, I really do agree with you.
Yeah. I mean,
for me, it was kind of like a treasure hunt. So I was completely like sucked in by that. But
right,
like we mentioned Ray Gillen earlier of Badlands. There's a Black Sabbath album called The Eternal Idol. Yes. And
stop doing that. Two of you said it in unison. It's like, holy shit.
We're in stereo. But he recorded either most of the vocals or all of the vocals for that album, and then he left the band, and that album was re-recorded with Tony Martin. And for years, that was like the holy grail to find, and now it's all on YouTube.
Well, actually, Neil, I'll do you one better. In England, they did the 20th Century remastered 2-disc versions of a lot of those 80s Black Sabbath albums, which I'm kind of pissed off about because it took me a while to get a lot of them on CD, and just when I finally got most of them, I started hearing they're doing these 20th Century remastered. And if you buy the 20th Century remastered version of Eternal Idol, you will get the Ray Gillen version of the album, along with the Tony Martin.
Wow.
Oh, wait, dude. Born Again, the one with Ian Gillen?
Mm-hmm.
The one from 82?
Right.
If you buy that one, you get the live show where you had Black Sabbath doing "Smoke on the Water."
Oh my God.
Oh yeah. Basically, I'm looking at it. I'm like, I just got these. They're only UK exclusive because unfortunately there isn't that big of a demand for 80s Sabbath. I mean, I'm actually kind of glad I discovered them because I was going to drop a chunk of change for Headless Cross and Tire, but I'm like, oh, you know what? Forget it. They're probably going to remaster Headless Cross and Tire soon. So,
and Headless Cross has had a track that was long missing, and now it's. Did they put it back on the album? What was it? Cloak and Dagger.
Well, the only version of Headless Cross I have now came from a copy of Classic Rock magazine.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't bought any of the official releases just because I'm waiting for them to remaster it. But the one I have does not have Cloak and Dagger. I think the only way to get Cloak and Dagger right now is to get the Sabbath Stones Greatest Hits set, which came out in the mid-90s. I'd have to double-check that.
Now, what do you... And this is more so a general music question versus a specific to heavy metal. What do you guys prefer buying? Do you prefer buying each album as it comes out? Or do you prefer waiting for a Greatest Hits album? Or do you get both?
In my case, I really do not buy music from new artists anymore. So,
okay, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying it has to be a new artist. I'm saying, okay, say, heaven forbid this ever happens, but say, your house catches on fire and you lose all your CDs. Would you prefer going back and getting a full-on compilation 5-disc set of a greatest hits album, or would you want to go back and buy each album separately?
I would probably at first buy the compilation just so I can have the tracks I really like first, and then work my way back to getting the albums.
Yeah.
A great example is I got for my birthday a couple of years ago the Ronnie James Dio era Black Sabbath box set, which was the albums Heaven and Hell all the way up, into Heaven and Hell, Mob Rules, Live Evil, and Dehumanizer, which were the 4 albums he did with Black Sabbath. Now, of course, I got that, I listened to it,